There is no question that June 20th, 2013 will be remembered as the beginning of the worst natural disaster in Alberta's history. I saw Albertans ache for those affected, give thanks for first responders, and rally around friends, neighbors, and strangers in need. And we stood together to extend a helping hand. There are countless stories about the unique acts of heroism and kindness. We never want to forget what happened. From the perspective of those who risked their lives to the community leaders and public servants who continue to work tirelessly to rebuild our communities, here is our untold story.
Wednesday, June 19, 2013. That's when the crisis hit. A storm system had moved in and settled on the foothills and along the mountain ranges in southern Alberta and just began to rain. In some circumstances, it rained 2 or 3 or 4 times more than what was forecast. And in some situations, it came down not in days as was predicted, but in hours. And it filled up creeks and washed them out, and then it filled up rivers and it washed them out. And though it all began here in Canmore with that storm system, within hours it had spread across southern Alberta. We went from having almost a dozen states of local emergency within a few hours to 28 states of local emergency within 2 days. And it impacted every single one of those communities different. In each of those 28 communities, families' lives were devastated. Some of them lost everything. This flood event changed our landscape. It's changed our lives, and it will change our history. This will go down as the worst disaster the province of Alberta has ever experienced.
It was obvious within just a short space of time that what we were dealing with was way beyond the capability of any single community to deal with.
There's a big snow shed up there where snow collects in the winter, and late June it's starting to melt because the temperature is rising, and if there's a big rainfall, it brings the snow, it melts the snow and brings down a lot of water at the same time. And it's not so much a flood, it's more like an erosion event, or some people liken it to a landslide. So you have a lot of material coming down a very steep chute. By about 2 in the morning, decided we had to open the Emergency Operations Center and declare the local state of emergency. So it was pretty amazing to watch this emergency team come together and just start doing what they're supposed to do. Although people had trained and rehearsed for various emergencies, this was the real thing.
What we realized was this was a scale and order of magnitude that we had never seen before.
It rained fiercely starting early Wednesday night. Our first responders were out here by 6 in the morning, and it was clear we were in big trouble. I phoned Barb at the trading post at 7:30, and she said, "Please bring sandbags." Within 20 minutes it was over. Unfortunately, the full force of the river hit it, ripped out the storefront. We had moccasins, beautiful moccasins, scattered the whole way up Main Street. And we have about 63 businesses, storefronts, and then another probably 30 or 40 home bays. They were absolutely wiped out. They were hit really hard.
If people suffered a lot of destruction, it's years to come back.
The 2005, we were flooding somewhere around 400 cubic meters per second in and around the area of Turner Valley. This occasion, they forecast it to have exceeded 900 cubic meters per second. So the actual height of the water, or the elevation of the water, was quite a bit higher. One of the other big differences is the velocity of the water was such that it made the river move laterally. Okay? So it wasn't just the height of the water, but it was actually the river creating new channels for itself.
But unfortunately, this disaster was such a big disaster, one we haven't seen to this level in the province before.
June 20th, and that's a day very few of us will forget here in High River. At 7:04, our council declared a local state of emergency. At 9 o'clock, we had water coming into parts of the town that we hadn't experienced before, and even into our downtown area. Half an hour later, that water was 3 feet high, and we were no longer a flood. Now we became a disaster.
In a normal flow situation, the river here flows in units of cubic meters at a number of 25. This town starts to experience flooding at around 210 cubes. They estimate that during this flood event, the water was well in excess of 2,000 cubes.
The Alberta Emergency Management Agency was on the ground here on the very second day and began to work with our Emergency Operations Center for that very first week. Other provincial departments were there immediately, including the Strathcona Fire Department.
People don't understand the wall of water that came through this community.
You could almost think of it a bit as a bathtub. When the river rose, it actually filled a bathtub with water, and as the river receded, the water trapped inside that topography was unable to recede and stayed trapped for weeks afterwards.
I'm still a registered paramedic in the province, and so taking this on, it was really moving into a role that I was comfortable with. I understood right away the magnitude of what was happening here in High River.
We had to evacuate our entire community to deal with this disaster.
Now 1,800 cubic meters is the flow rate that goes over Niagara Falls.
In 10/18, we declared a state of local emergency because of the impending floodwater that was coming towards Calgary. So you can start to do things like mandatory evacuations, movement of large numbers of people. We're talking to the Provincial Operations Center. We were doing a lot of work back and forth between the province.
We have a cross-ministry team making sure that we move quickly as we could on the things that needed to be done. Here in the city of Calgary, when we look at the bowfish habitat, that those fish were rescued and that habitat was looked after right away as well. The Calgary Zoo, when we had the hippos were trapped, and so in there making sure that we could work with the zoo as well. There's so many great stories of so many things that people have done.
We're estimating now it was probably closer to 103,000 people that were actually moved. Now out of those, about 80,000 of them self-evacuated based on the announcements we made.
Well, you know, when the flood hit Calgary, Sixica was hit very hard. Being that it is right in the floodplain, and it actually had sustained damage in 2005 also. But the volume of water this time was quite devastating to the community, and you know, we had over 1,000 evacuees that lost their homes or had their homes underwater. We had issues in Morley too because of culverts and roads being washed out. We had some homes damaged. We had a few homes in Satina also damaged around Redwood Meadows.
We've had the 100-year flood, we've had the 200-year flood. Now I'm not sure what this category is, but this is the worst we've ever seen it.
The hazard, if you will, moved from community to community. Then those communities that were first affected, like Canmore, Exshore, Kananaskis, they wanted to move into recovery, and I was determined that we would provide the resources that recognize their desire to move back into normalcy as soon as possible, even whilst realizing that the hazard hadn't even got to Medicine Hat yet.
Through this part of Alberta, we had less damage outside of the river valley because the flooding was spread out over a little bit more time. We had 30 water treatment systems impacted by the flood. So although you don't hear about it in the news all the time, 30 communities had their water services impacted. Pump houses flooded, electrical systems shorted out, pumps damaged, intake structures simply washed away, those kinds of things all across southern Alberta.
You know, there was all that unfolded in Calgary, and then south of Calgary, Turner Valley, Black Diamond, High River, and then of course the water was moving, and Lethbridge, Medicine Hat areas were impacted as well. So it's that has been one of the major challenges, is that it covered so many communities.
This flood event was the greatest natural disaster the province of Alberta has ever seen. There's no doubt about that. But it was no match for the incredible fortitude and spirit that our first responders showed in making sure that Albertans were kept safe and rescued. Our first responders in every single community met every single challenge head on to keep Albertans safe. And there are stories of heroism that need to be told.
You know, we had been building a system that would enable us to reach out to other communities and to Strathcona County. And so they had a team on the road, on their way. They arrived in High River in the early hours of the morning.
Well, the rescue efforts were amazing. And we actually began evacuating people with combines and rock trucks and boats just to get them to higher ground and to safety.
The amazing thing about first responders is people, when they sign up to do this job, they know what they're getting into.
I recall one gentleman saying it was when he got word of the flood in the Hamptons, it was a couple of minutes to get his coat and get to the vehicle. It was a few minutes to get down to the store to grab some provisions. And after being in the store about 10 minutes, he came back out to the front and his car was gone. And he was terrified about his wife and kids that he'd left at home because he didn't realize just how fast it was going to move and how fast it was going to happen.
So we were driving the boat on here. Mailbox, you know, was covered in water. That house behind us there, we drove right up to the front veranda.
That's where you rescued?
That's where we got the mom and her couple kids from.
This was all underwater just a matter of a couple of weeks ago?
Yes. We're coming into the Hamptons area and we noticed a young lady standing on her back deck. Carried them up onto the boat, dropped them off with the grandparents and granddaughter and mom and the two young kids, and a lot of relief in a lot of faces.
I know that Dad that I talked to welled up with tears. He couldn't have said thank you enough to you guys. And there are so many stories of that sort of event happening.
And some of the people that were working on the emergency, literally right on the creek, their homes were flooding somewhere else. And yet they just put that aside, I don't know how, and dealt with the overall emergency.
And I remember on that first night, we got a call from Exshaw. They needed cots, blankets, hygiene kits. They had a huge number of homes impacted. They were cut off because of the highway. We delivered them within hours to a site where they were loaded onto the helicopter and then dropped into the community. That's what it was like.
Well, we had some outstanding things happen. The contractors for our water and wastewater servicing, they were directionally drilling. They went out to try to save some people who got stranded on the roof of their car. Their drilling rig broadsided and essentially deflected the river and saved that whole rung of houses over there. The rig didn't do so well, but the houses did.
Provincial government was quite invaluable on many levels. A lot of the technical expertise that they were providing was very, very invaluable.
Everybody that operates in this environment knows that in order to do that, you need to be calm, rational, you need to be well prepared, and that you need to be knowledgeable, you need to have empathy, but you need to be decisive.
Woke up in the morning just to come to work, kind of as usual. We had been warned about the rain, heavy rains the night before, and it rained a lot, but didn't really notice anything.
At the time, there was 400 guests in the hotel and 300 employees that live on site. And I got a call that there was going to be a local state of emergency declared in Kananaskis. I called my managers and said that the roads were closed to Kananaskis and Highway 40 wasn't travelable at this stage.
There are cars stuck in the water, roads completely washed out.
We were contacted by one of the representatives, Sean Pauly from KID, asking if we'd be able to gather some equipment to go and clear a couple landslides down the road. We noticed that there was pretty extensive erosion on this north bank here of Ribbon Creek. We should probably get people out of here right away.
I actually couldn't believe it. I had to come down here and see it for myself because I didn't think the bridge could actually, like, water could take a bridge out like that.
Yeah.
I was amazed. That essentially left us alone on an island, if you will.
We helped them out on the other side for most of the night, and at that point we met with Paul from Ensign and a few of his other colleagues. You're sitting there, everyone's kind of talking about what is happening, what they've seen. Can you believe this? I heard this. And then it was kind of a matter of, well, what are we going to do to get out of here? What can we do? My mechanical superintendent, Ken, and I had kind of formulated a plan to backfill and find some rig mats, and the gentleman from Ensign so happened were able to readily get rig mats. It's just a mat that displaces weight, and they put it over soft ground, mushy ground. And so what it's meant to do is just displace the weight so that you're not sinking into the soft ground.
At about 2:30 or 3 o'clock, Transportation Alberta arrived at the bridge, said that the bridge was good to have passenger traffic and vehicle traffic, not bus traffic. The chief engineer for Ensign, where I ended up finding him, was on the bridge watching every vehicle go across the temporary bridge, standing there in the rain. And I just thought it spoke to a lot of things, but his commitment to make this happen, his commitment to not only his company, but everyone else that was here, that there he was watching every vehicle go across the bridge to ensure that it was fine. And that evening, he was essentially one of the last vehicles across to go home. So I was extremely impressed.
I think it was very positive, and myself being from Calgary, I appreciated it quite a bit. Like it was nice and special out here to see everyone kind of come together, but it seemed to resonate throughout the entire community for weeks after that, and it was just nice to see.
The team that was in this room was absolutely incredible. At the peak of what was going on, we had about 200 people working out of this facility. It was incredible to watch the rhythm they got into, how quickly they were making decisions and how effective those decisions were.
Medicine Hat actually received about 48 hours of extra warning, and they were able to bring in the armed forces.
When we first arrived in Medicine Hat, I went to the Emergency Operations Center and met some of the key players. And they asked me what I brought to the table, and I said 300 soldiers. Most agencies don't understand what 300 soldiers could do and can do. It's going to take probably 24 to 36 hours of hard work, no sleep, keep going. The ones that were on buses were taken directly to the site and started building sandbag dikes that night because time was of the essence to try and get everything built as quickly as possible so that you can beat the rise of the flood, if you will. One other thing is Sunday morning, I requested to my boss an additional 200 soldiers. 4 or 5 hours before the expected crest, the dikes were in place and we were just doing management to see how it went.
And as you know, these armed forces folks are very well trained, and the amount of work they can get done in a day is incredible.
Right, so it's been an extraordinary effort of connecting across the system and finding the right people with the right training and to get to the right place at the right time. As we managed the event, even in the early days, it seemed extraordinary that we would be dealing with response while simultaneously thinking about recovery.
People were rescued by trucks, by boats, by helicopters, even by combines. But once the rescue efforts were over, people's attention turned to the recovery process. That meant cleaning up the debris. There was garbage from basements, there was debris in nature strewn all over our streets. Volunteers came out by the thousands to help rebuild our communities, to help with the recovery process. It's incredible what they did. In fact, rubber boots and rubber gloves became the new fashion trend. Those volunteers showed us what the Alberta spirit means. And on behalf of every single Albertan, I want to say thank you to the volunteers.
We saw how people responded, helping neighbors, helping friends, but also helping strangers. As I was talking to one volunteer in High River who said, you know, I'm pretty sure we're going to be spending Christmas dinner together, and we never met each other until a week ago.
So many people were here helping in some way. It's a part of the character of the people that live in this region, perhaps across Alberta, perhaps across Canada.
Unreal. Like, we have friends that live here and they're in the red zone, and we're going to help anybody we can.
Just the way people pitched in and did whatever, whatever they possibly could to help, to contribute, without exception.
The volunteers came, the wonderful volunteers, like, amazing.
The spirit of the community as a whole, I think, is extremely positive. As the residents were returning, they immediately began rolling up their sleeves and get to work doing the cleanup and starting the remediation on their own homes. Neighbor helping neighbor, it was impressive to see.
This is an issue of humanity and recognizing that there's a need.
We were averaging about 3,000 volunteers a day in those early days, and we were so grateful for that because we certainly needed that kind of help.
The volunteerism, the spirit of the city, the ability of people to work together and help out not only people within Calgary but in surrounding communities, I think speaks to the nature of what people are in Alberta and how we all work together.
Oh my goodness, look at all of you.
It's our city and people are suffering. I mean, you just want to help.
We utilize volunteers from all across Canada, and you cannot underestimate the importance of the volunteer teams being in the community, going door to door, and taking the time to talk to impacted people.
Your heart just, breaks for the people. I mean, so devastating, but also it really warms your heart when you see how everyone is looking after everyone else.
I think we've also redefined what we are as Albertans.
"28 communities that are all fixing, repairing, or rebuilding in their own way. We know that there isn't a magic bullet solution to the way each community is going to have to repair or rebuild after these floods. And that's why the province, municipalities, the community, volunteer organizations, and businesses are all coming together to find the unique solution, community by community. And we're not just going to rebuild or repair the damage that was done by these floods. We're going to rebuild to make sure our communities are resilient going into the future. We owe that to all Albertans.
I remember at the very beginning talking to people from the very beginning about how we were going to get through this, we were going to build better, we were going to be stronger as people and as communities.
I was called one day just shortly after the flood started, and I was asked to lead the task force. In the military for 30 years, retired as a brigadier general, and I had been involved in reconstruction efforts both in Canada, in other disasters, and abroad in other countries such as Afghanistan and Bosnia. And what we saw very quickly, in really a matter of days, was watching Albertans empower themselves. And
for somebody else to come in and fix our town.
Well, we are going to put this town back together again better than before. The rebuild and restructure of our community is going to take several years. It's not a very quick process.
Bright Creek, it's a really sad story. Obviously that town was overtaken with significant water from the Elbow River. As soon as you step foot in that town, you could feel the spirit of how they were going to rebuild and make that a better place.
Because of the way the community and all the communities have rallied to support the residents, there's some real strength, some real resilience.
My hope would be to continue the tradition in some form, but probably never the same.
All of Southern Alberta is pulled together, and that's probably been one of the highlights of this, is seeing everyone pull together. But the challenge is just the sheer size of the damage that's been done. What we have to do is not just rebuild, but rebuild in such a way as to minimize future impacts. And if we do it properly and we do it smart, we can protect many, many homes and families from having this happen again.
So as we move forward and put together strategies that will include not only mitigation, but also water storage and how we deal with water management, even through drought conditions, that's smart, it's innovative, and it's what we need to do as Albertans.
And I can certainly say that the speed at which we're moving is unprecedented in my personal experience. What I'm getting is resources and decisions as quickly as possible.
We know these aren't easy decisions, and we want to support each other as Albertans, but we're going to make sure that we do it in a way that allows us to continue to build the whole province.
So many of those people are incredibly brave and resilient and calm. You know, one or two people looking back and realizing, no doubt, that life would never be quite the same for them.
Certainly Mother Nature dealt us a pretty big blow, but I think we picked ourselves up off the mat and put ourselves together and started fighting again, and that's what Albertans do.
These people will overcome. You can tell, you can feel it.
The things that have come out of it, to me, not only show hope in a community, but talk about human spirit and talk about how we're connected beyond things.
Maybe it's the spirit of the West. You know, you just, when something happens, you just pitch in and help your neighbors.
This is what Albertans are all about. This is it. You step up and you do whatever you can for your neighbors, because it could be you tomorrow.
You know, to see everybody come together and work hard to put this community back on its feet again is very heartwarming.
What we saw with the collaboration of companies coming together and was absolutely the spirit of the business community.
And you know, there's a spirit of volunteerism that I think is second to none across Canada.
Most important things in life aren't things at all.
The worst disaster in the province's history affected a lot of Albertans, but it impacted every single one of us. And it demonstrated that leadership rises up in troubled times. From our provincial and municipal leadership, to our volunteers and our first responders, from our small business to our industry, every single Albertan stepped up and assisted from the crisis to the rescue, from the recovery through the rebuilding. Every single Albertan stepped up and became a leader. And we demonstrated to the rest of the world that we are a province full of leaders that are there to support each other in troubled times. We were challenged. We will prevail. We're Albertans.